This video is brought to you by Carcajou Tactical and Grey Fox Strategic. For 10% off your next purchase with Grey Fox Strategic, use code DA10.
Welcome everybody. Thanks for tuning in, listening, and watching. It's Randy with Direct Action. Today we're going to bang off a big list of Ask the Operator questions. So these have been accumulating over the last couple of months. So hopefully the questions that you guys pose do get answered today. And if not, keep the questions coming and we'll address them when we can.
Amazing. Okay, first question. This is from Instagram. 38-year-old LEO looking for a change. Is a non-operator spot in CSOR/JTF2 or JTF attainable?
Yes. So the question you're asking is for a support or a specialist role in JTF2, CSOR, C driver, somewhere in the CANSOFCOM command. Yeah, there is. There are spaces and positions that are, often looking to be filled with expertise and professionals that have the qualifications and the desire to fill those positions. Sometimes they're temporary. It might be a 2 or 3 year posting before maybe you get posted out of the command. In some cases, depending on the specialty, depending on the trade, you could foresee yourself there for quite some time. So as a 38-year-old, yeah, not an operator, but that's okay. I'm sure you have something valuable to bring to the table. There's an application process for the support or specialist roles within those organizations. You can reach out, ask the right questions, and find out what's available.
Next question. Any experiences working with RCN clearance divers?
Yeah, I've had a little bit of exposure and some work with the clearance divers. So the Navy has a trade as a clearance diver. The history and the infancy of what they do was really to provide underwater demolitions and port inspections for the risks to Navy vessels at port. So it's a pretty unique trade. My exposure to them is very difficult trade to get into, very difficult course to pass. It's not easy. It's physically demanding. It's mentally demanding. But the folks that are successful and they find themselves in that position, they seem to really enjoy it. Are they maybe underutilized from an operational perspective? Yeah, maybe. But the expertise and the professionalism of what they bring to the table is quite unique to the Navy.
Amazing. Next question. I love this question because I know what your answer is going to be. Do you think it will be easier to make it to JTF2 now based on the caliber of people currently serving?
No, I don't think it's going to be easier. I think the standard is the standard, and JTF2 prides itself on that standard. So individuals that are preparing themselves, I think, need to take a deep dive and really connect with why they want to become a JTF2 assaulter, and if they have what it takes from an intestinal fortitude perspective, from a mental perspective, an overall physical readiness perspective. Based on what I saw over the last few years, I think there's a lot of people that have aspirations to get there, but they don't realize how difficult it is and how challenging it is to actually succeed. So they need to really look at themselves in the mirror and be honest with the way that they're preparing, the way that they're training, and really take a step into being as uncomfortable as you possibly can in preparation so that when you're on selection, you're there to perform. Do I think it's easier now given the state of the quality of individual that's trying to? No, I don't think it's any easier. I think there's still a lot of really good people that understand what hard work looks like and what it takes to get at these higher levels. And for those people, they will be rewarded with success. And for those that are lying to themselves or not training adequately for the rigors of what selection process will put them through, I think they're going to be in for a rude awakening.
Next question. Been looking at joining the forces with the goal of CSOR at 36. Is it worth it?
I think anything is worth it. You can look at the life journey that you're on. One day we're all going to wake up at 85 years old and we're going to forget where our keys are. That's reality. So you're 36 years old. If it's it's in your heart, it's in your head. You're motivated with why you want to be part of that organization, I would say do it. Try it and see how it works out for you. You would be proud of yourself for attempting. You'll be proud of yourself for putting in the work to prepare for it. And I think if things worked out for you, you'd be very happy that you made that choice and you'd be part of a great organization.
What are the mental differences between CSOR and JTF2 operators?
The mental differences, I would have to ask this individual, what are the mental differences in terms of what context? Mental preparation, or is it the rigors of the job itself? Is it, what the tempo between the two organizations puts on the operator, on the assaulter? I think there are definitely some differences from a cognitive selection process. I think there's a difference on the demands between the organizations in terms of preparation and preparing for CSOR assessment phase or JTF2 selection phase. Mental strength is definitely a key component that we need to consider prior to stepping into the arena. Without the mental strength, the physical may not be there for you, or vice versa. If you're overly physically ready but underdeveloped mentally from a maturity level, I think those areas will be highlighted very quickly. So what makes the two biggest differences from my exposure to the two organizations? Generally, CSOR is a younger organization. Lots of great operators. They're doing a lot of good work. It's a great organization. Generally, I would say the culture is a little bit younger. And then JTF2 guys are a little bit more seasoned, have a little bit more life experience. Not all. This is generalization. Still some young dudes at JTF2. Just generally speaking, from my exposure and what I can offer is oftentimes people will look at applying for CSOR first to maybe gain some experience with the thought of potentially down the road trying out for JTF2. Or I've had, a lot of young men reach out to me and they feel like they don't want to try out for JTF2 just yet because they're a bit young, bit inexperienced, and they feel like they'd be, swinging outside their weight class. I would say if your heart is one or the other, then, prepare yourself for it and do your best to achieve those desired goals. Whether it's CSOR, JTF2, CJIRU, do a little bit of research, find out what it is that you're getting into, because the organizations are all very different. Although they overlap in some capacities, some of the tradecraft and skillcraft are similar and there are some crossover. All three organizations are very different, and that's designed on purpose. I've answered this question in the past, but I'll answer it again. You can imagine having three organizations that are tasked and mandated to do the exact same thing. It would be redundant, and it would not benefit the country or the government to have three identical organizations. So yes, they're all different. If you're interested in one of these organizations, do some research, talk to some of the folks that are actually doing the job, get the real ground truth of what's going on, and that will help guide your decision. For me to not know who the folks are that are asking these questions, I would have to get to know your personality a little bit. I'd have to get to, ask those questions of why. Why do you want to become an operator? Why do you want to become an assaulter? And then from those answers, I would be able to help guide your decision and put you in the right direction.
When did you do your CAC level C? Is it CAC level C or is it CAC?
Yeah, conduct after capture.
Okay. When did you do your CAC level C, and how vital was the training to your role in JTF2?
So I did conduct after capture twice, because the first time I was unsuccessful, which is a story on itself, which we'll save for another segment. But during the Special Operations Assaulter course, it was very close to the end, one of the final phases to completion of the course, and I underperformed. There are certain things that you can and cannot say. There are certain things that you need to release under control at a very specific time based on the context of the situation that we're in. And given that education and that training prior to actually executing on the job during training phase, I was unsuccessful. So I was fortunate enough to graduate the course that year, and then I went back the following year to finish or to repeat the conduct after capture, which I was successful second time around. What I learned from it, from the first time to the second, was how important emotional control is, how to release specific information when you're in a somewhat stressful or extremely fatigued state. So that's what I learned from the two experiences that I was so fortunate to have. How it translated into overall employment while at the unit, I would say there were experiences that I was, fortunate enough to have exposure to while employed and while deployed, that components of that training definitely came to the surface, where understanding how to interact with people from foreign countries, what to say, what not to say, definitely helped, I would say, prime the most optimal outcome. So yeah, there's benefit to it for sure. I think it's something that everybody in the Canadian Armed Forces would benefit from undergoing. It's a challenge physically, mentally, but it's not impossible. It's a good segment of training.
How did you deal with self-doubt during / preparing for selection? How did you handle that?
The moments of self-doubt that entered my head were more so after completing selection, less when I entered selection. There were times going into selection, like in preparation, for example. So I trained really extremely hard for probably almost 3 years before actually getting an opportunity to try out for JTF2. So what happened, first year I put in an application. I did not follow up on the paperwork and the administration side of things, and the application did not get processed. So I missed the first year. Learned from that mistake, followed up on the paperwork the second year. 2 weeks prior to going on selection, I broke my wrist. So I had to wait another year. My wrist wouldn't have been healthy at that time enough to attempt selection. So the final interview, when this came to the surface, I was literally still in a cast when I was doing my final interview prior to selection. They determined that I would wait another year. So the third year, stayed healthy, trained extremely hard, paperwork is in place, and then I had an opportunity to try out. So that was kind of my journey. So it took 3 years to get the opportunity to try out. I had 3 years to fuel that fire. I had 3 years to prepare. I had 3 years to gain more experience with the 2nd Battalion PPCLI. I had 3 years to expose myself to some really good leadership, surround myself with some really good guys that, pushed me, challenged me, but also helped me and guide me. So the first time around, I was successful. And 2003 did selection, and then course loaded for the assaulter course in 2004. The self-doubt piece. I was so fueled by waiting 3 years that I convinced myself that I was going to make it, that I had everything in order physically, mentally to make it. So the only way, and I was convinced, the only way that I was leaving selection is if I was literally being resuscitated, where I was physically unable to continue, or somebody from the instructor staff put their hand on my shoulder and said, "You're done. You don't have what it takes. Thanks for coming out." So I was convinced leading into it, that's the only way I was leaving. Where the self-doubt entered my head was in the weeks after selection, getting back home to my home unit, 2nd Battalion PPCLI. I was convinced that I didn't perform optimally. I was convinced that I underperformed. I wasn't what they're looking for. So there was a lot of self-doubt. And the way that I combated against that was, it was my first attempt. So if I got that notice and I've got that confirmation that I was not selected, I was convinced that I was going to go back the next year and give it a second chance. So the self-doubt piece was, weeks, if I'm not mistaken. It was a couple of months before we actually got notification that we were course loaded. In that time frame, I kept telling myself, well, what can I do to get better? The areas that on selection that I felt were, I performed less optimally, I tried to dissect that a little bit. And then I was already preparing the next year's training regime to polish those areas. But the kicker is you don't get any feedback on selection. So you don't know where you went wrong or what you could have done better. It's just self-reflection, self-introspection, where I felt like I failed, where I felt like I underperformed, making those determinations, and then already creating a plan on how I would try to polish those up in the future. Long story short, things worked out, and then I was course loaded. That being said, self-doubt entered my head several times during the almost year-long assaulter course, because there's a lot of information. There are a lot of standards that need to be met, and they're high standards. And, every phase of training, sometimes it's a couple of weeks, sometimes it's, 3 or 4 weeks. Each segment of training comes with an assessment, comes with a performance check, comes with an obligation to perform. So there were different parts of the course overall where I self-doubted. If I had what it took, I self-doubted whether or not I had the skills or I ascertained the skills well enough to perform most optimally. And again, the way that I combated against that was every day we would get feedback on how you performed, what areas to polish, what areas to do better. And I would take that information to heart and I would do everything I could to apply those corrections the next day. So that's how I dealt with self-doubt. I'd be lying if I said there was moments during that course where I wasn't sure if I was going to graduate. But the way that I persevered and pushed through that was every bit of information, anything that was, thrown towards me in terms of demonstrating how to do better, I try to apply it the next day. So basically I broke it down to one day at a time.
What is your take on a medic becoming an assaulter?
Medics can become assaulters. They've done it in the past and they'll do it again in the future. I think there's different personalities that are designed well, and they have the attributes to become really good assaulters. It just so happens that some of them come from the medical trade, just like some of them come from the Navy, just like some of them come from the Air Force. There are good people and there are good soldiers throughout all elements of the Canadian Armed Forces. What's cool about the selection process is when a person goes through that, you're all the same, no matter if you're an officer or you're a non-commissioned member, you're a medic, you're a communicator, you're a weapons tech. It does not matter. On selection, you're all the same. You're a number and you're attempting to demonstrate that you have teachable mannerisms and the traits are suitable for employment with JTF2. So that's what's really cool about the process. So to answer your question, it does not matter what your trade is. It doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't. None of that really matters. What matters is how you perform on the 7-day selection, and demonstrating that you're teachable and that the organization is willing and ready to invest in you, the individual.
Do I, this person, need to know orienteering for selection?
No, you do not need to know orienteering. Will it help you? Of course. Everything that is required for you to perform on selection will be taught to you. So without giving anything away, which I will not, what I can tell any individual who is interested in trying out any education you do in preparation is only going to help you. So if you're, interested in public speaking, you might think, well, how does public speaking help me on selection? It's a new skill. It's something that you're demonstrating you have the ability to put yourself into uncomfortable positions. It shows that you are self-motivated. It demonstrates that you are continuously wanting to learn and improve. So no matter what the skill is, whether it's orienteering, maybe you're doing some backcountry camping, you're learning the intricacies of survival in the bush. Any skill is good skill. A first aid course is a good skill. Anything, any type of continued education is only going to benefit you. So where I'm going with this is on selection, part of what they're assessing is your ability to retain the information and then apply it. So you might get a piece of information on Monday, we'll say, but you may not be required to execute that information until Thursday or Friday. So can you absorb that information and then apply it later on during the process? And if you have those abilities, which some people do, and some people just need a little bit more time, it doesn't mean that you're not value added. It doesn't mean that you're unintelligent. What it means is that certain aspects of character traits are highlighted during selection. So hopefully that answers your question. Do you need to prepare yourself for orienteering, how to navigate on land in preparation for selection? No, they're going to teach you everything you need to know. The job of you is to absorb that information and then apply it with logic, safety, and common sense.
What was your 1 rep max on SBD before going to selection and at the end of your career?
Before going to selection, I don't remember exactly what my one rep max for squat, bench, or deadlift. I do remember some numbers. For example, I remember at one point in preparation for selection, I was able to bench press 225 on an incline press, which is not wise, and I wouldn't recommend it for somebody that's 145 pounds. But I was strong, and I was able to, push 225 in an incline press. At the end of my career, oh man, I don't lift heavy, and seldom lifted very heavy the last few years of my career, only because I don't see any benefit to it. I learned and matured along my career, and I had some significant shoulder surgeries, both left and right. So yeah, prior to selection, I do remember 225 being a number for the bench. For the squat, I remember 285 pounds for a decent, deep level squat was a number that brings a tone in my head. And then for deadlift, I was a little bit stronger. I remember at one point 315 was probably the most that I deadlift. And to be honest, like some of those numbers and the motivation to push those numbers were really ego, nothing that helped me, to be completely honest, in terms of preparation or preparing. If anything, it just did unwanted and unneeded damage. I wouldn't recommend it. There's ways to work up strength, and some of those three prime mover movements and strength and conditioning are important. So being able to squat well, being able to bench well, being able to deadlift well, be able to bent over row well, pull your body up on a pull-up bar, for many reps, or weight it. These are all things that are important, don't get me wrong, in terms of overall strength and conditioning preparation. But it's not, I wouldn't recommend it as a main focus. It's more, oftentimes those numbers become more ego driven, where it's like, can you add another 5 pounds? Can you add another 5 pounds? But at what point is it worth it? I don't know, if there's an arbitrary number for the individual. What I would just say is, yes, lift heavy shit from time to time. That's how you're going to get strong, but not every time. Not every time you go into the gym should you be trying to push those numbers.
What percentage of operators would you say stick with the standard C7 or C8 rifles? Your opinions? ?
If I understand this question, maybe to provide context, the organizations they have a standard platform. What the operator can do to personalize it is, they may choose a aim point red dot versus an EOTech, or they may choose a vertical forend hand grip or an angle foregrip. There's certain things on the furniture that the operator can make it individualized, but the platform itself is standardized, and that's done for a reason. Operating in a foreign country, the team is operating with the same platform, or there might be a couple variations of the platform, but generally speaking, the platform itself is standardized. That way, if a magazine needs to be swapped out, or part, piece, or component needs to be swapped out between team elements, then it's the same platform, and it keeps everybody unified in that regard operationally. So hopefully that answers your question, but some of the furniture that gets put on the C7 or C8 is user choice and personal preference based on the individual, but for the most part, the platform as a whole is standardized.
What would your ideal SF/assaulter applicant PT test be? Would it differ from the badged MBRS?
So I think like a PT standard, a physical ability standard in preparation for selection is going to vary on the individual. When I say vary, like some people, for example, 225 pounds, 6'4", who are able to run, a 2.4 or 2.5 kilometer in sub 9 minutes is That's a good thing. It's just not common. Generally, you see bigger dudes are a little bit slower running. Not always, of course. There's no always, never, or perfect in my vocabulary for the most part. But generally speaking, so the standard that you will see somebody's fitness when they enter selection and when they, go on to the assaulter course will look very different than when they graduate. When they graduate after a year-long course, they are busy. They are, there are physical demands for sure, but their overall PT standards of what got them there and when they finish is going to vary. There are a few guys that, when they graduated, you look at their body composition and the way that they finish when they graduated versus when they went on selection, they look very different. They look like two different human beings. So there's a standard to get into, to get an opportunity to demonstrate that you're going to perform. And then I would say the onus is on the professionalism of the individual. Once they graduate and, they become part of the team, be able to do your job well. And then on top of that, there's a standard that needs to be met every year. So a shooting standard, a PT standard, which you'll be privy to once you get there, but that standard still needs to be met. So if somebody's a wicked runner and runs like a rabbit leading into selection, they may maintain that, sustain that for the duration of their career, or, they maybe don't run as much, but they run enough that they can do their job really well.
What do you think drives an individual to become a tier 1 or any special operator?
I think the motivation that drives a lot of guys to become a tier 1 special operations assaulter is the desire to want to be part of, what's and I use this word with caution, but be part of the best of the best. And it's surrounding yourself with guys that are, professional, hungry, motivated to want to improve, to want to get better, to also see where there are deficiencies or holes in the overall structure from operational readiness, and then fill those holes and, come up with maybe new capabilities or polished capabilities that are already standing. And I think that's what's really cool about the organization, but what also motivates folks to want to do that, where if the government is going to call and it's a serious situation, it's going to be JTF2 that gets that first call. And that will remain the case for many, many years, in my opinion. So if you're going to put yourself in the most advantageous position to gain as much operational experience as you can ever foresee yourself doing as part of a member of the Canadian Armed Forces, then it would be JTF2. And that is not me discrediting any other organization, because every organization has something very unique and special that they offer the greater Canadian Armed Forces. So it's very task specific, it's very operationally specific, but where I'm going with that is I think what motivates a lot of guys to want to be part of the tier 1 organization is if something is going to happen, or if there's going to be a response required for that capability to be employed, it's going to go to the tier 1 organization first.
I like this. I'm curious if you answer this question. Best TAC unit in Canada based on your opinion and experience. I'm adding and experience. And best SOF organization in the world.
So best police tactical organization in Canada that I've been exposed to. Well, I want to preface this. I haven't touched all provinces in this country yet. I haven't been exposed to, the West Coast TAC team, the East Coast TAC teams in terms of overall policing, whether that's provincial, municipal, or federal. So my exposure has been mostly Ontario, municipal, provincial, and federal organizations, a little bit in Alberta, a little bit in New Brunswick, but I've seen good in all of these organizations. For me to say best, I don't even like the word best, to be honest. There are a lot of good organizations that are doing a lot of good work for Canada, for law enforcement agencies, through the organizations that I've been exposed. I don't know if I can answer who's the best, and nor do I want to, because there are a lot of good organizations do a lot of similar work. Who do I think is the best? Again, I use that word with caution. soft organization who I've been exposed to. All very similar. All have some really cool stuff about the organizations. I would say probably Delta, SASR in Australia. I've been exposed to awesome dudes. They've done some really good work. 22 SAS in the UK, same thing. They great dudes. They've done some really good work. Like it's very difficult to say which one. DevGru, SEAL Team 6, as famously known as. Same, some really good dudes, some really good capabilities. It's very difficult to say what's the best. I would say the organization that's probably in line with JTF2 more so than any other would be Delta. I think the way that they approach training, their professionalism, the way they take planning seriously, the way that they're relatively quiet. You don't hear and see a lot of books or movies made about them, falls in relative line to JTF2. So I think that relationship is healthy, and there are a lot of comparables between the two organizations. So maybe I'm a little bit biased, but my nod would go to Delta.
So back in 2016, I was able to start working with Kydex, and the reason I wanted to start working with Kydex was because I was a left-handed shooter. Finding left-handed gear was extremely hard, so I just put two and two together, started working with Kydex, making left-handed holsters for myself. From there, quote-unquote, refined my process. Started making gear for buddies that were cops in military, and it literally snowballed from there.
Everything that we do is handmade by shooters for shooters, and there's a lot of other Kydex companies out there, and they are also for shooters by shooters. But we take the time and we care about what we do, and I think that shows in our products.
Like working here, this is our home. We brought it from home and we created a home. Our kids have worked here, so this is our home.
Does JTF2 study film?
Yep. JTF2 uses film for training purposes. So they'll record elements of training, and they'll use it as feedback for coaching and for instructional benefits. For operational type stuff, not so much, at least not while I was employed. It may have changed over the last 5 years, but it wasn't something that we were, I would say, we had those conversations, but it wasn't something that we put too much energy or effort in. And where I'm going with that is, wearing a GoPro helmet or a mounted helmet, for example, or a camera on the long gun platform or on your carrier. It wasn't something that guys were really motivated or interested in doing. They were more interested in doing their job extremely well. And a lot of times that stuff just became a distraction. But for teaching purposes and for training the next batch of assaulters, yes, it is utilized. It's a great tool for coaching and feedback. And I see that only, really taken next bounds in terms of flight and capability, in terms of using that for the tool that it is, which is beneficial for the end user.
Did you ever have a lanyard on your sidearm, and why?
I did. I used the lanyard for many, many years. retractable lanyard is for the most part what I use, so it wouldn't get hung up on too much. But it still got hung up on things. So like there's pros and cons to it. Why and where I chose to connect a lanyard to my holster, my carrier of some capacity was because I spent a lot of time doing maritime special operations. So in and above water, if for whatever reason, the pistol got hung up on something and it got detached from the holster, I obviously didn't want to lose the pistol. So that's why I chose to use a lanyard. And even when I moved away from the MSO type of stuff, I still use the lanyard quite a bit. I don't anymore. And even the last couple of years I was at the unit, I took it off only because I had an incident where I was rappelling from a helicopter, and as I was, turning from short final and getting ready to jump off the skid, my holster and gun got caught up, and it was due to the lanyard. It got caught up on something inside the airframe, and when I launched off the side of the bird, it did break and detach, but the pistol came crashing down onto the ground beside me, and it was in a couple of pieces. So it was that moment where I kind of thought, well, case by case and situationally dependent. I can put that on if I'm over the water, but do I need to wear it all of the time? Maybe not. So yes, I used to use it a fair bit. The latter part of my career, I took it off.
ISR coverage on missions, pros and cons.
Pros and cons to having ISR coverage on missions. A lot more pros than cons. Depending on the setup and depending on the capability, you could literally have live feed, real-time feed. Every step that we take along the way, you've got that feedback, what's going on overhead. So definitely a lot more positives than negatives. The only real negative that I can even think about is sometimes the information is not 100% accurate on what is seen from the sky and what we see on the ground. So sometimes it can lead to predetermined biases. So that's really the only small negative effect, but there's definitely way more positives than there are negative, having a set of eyes in the sky helping us out.
Did you have any mentors during your time at the unit?
I did. I had several mentors throughout my time at the unit. Had a couple of really good officers that, provided a lot of good feedback and saw things a little bit differently than some of the non-commissioned officers. I had good mentors that were, higher rank. I had good mentors that were lower rank. I had good mentors that were junior to me. And I think a good mentor is somebody that provides information and guidance based on the way that they see things and the perception of the reality that we're sharing together. So to benefit from having a mentor is also being humble enough to listen to somebody's advice, take it for what it is, and then try to dissect it in terms of how does it apply to, at the end of the day, becoming a little bit better, a little bit more efficient, and just overall more professional approach. So being humble to ask those questions, being confident to say it's okay not to have all of the answers and know everything about everything. Those two, that confidence, humility is kind of like 2 cups of water, where sometimes we got to give a little, sometimes we got to take a little, but at the end of the day, we're trying to keep it even keel. So yes, did I have mentors at the unit that helped me along the way? For sure. I've had a lot of good people surrounding me that provided some great advice. Also had the confidence to tell me when I was at a line and, get my head out of my ass. So I was very fortunate. Yeah, there's a lot of good people that, I owe thanks to.
As someone who owns 100 pairs of shoes and is a gear whore, how do you choose footwear for your operations?
How do I choose footwear for operations? Pretty simple. If they can drain well, so chances are feet are going to get wet. I'm not a big fan of Gore-Tex. Once Gore-Tex is wet, it takes a long time for it to dry. So I look at footwear pretty simple. Does it have good drainage? Is it comfortable enough that I can wear it in all terrains? So whether I'm hanging out on a concrete slab or I'm walking through the bush with undulating terrain, will they hold up? And then the big one for me is ankle support. And what I mean ankle support, not rolling the ankles, because you could still roll your ankles even if you're wearing, a 9-inch high boot. It's not as prevalent, but it can still happen. But what I mean by ankle support is are my ankles protected? So if I'm going to kick something or boot something over, will there be a little bit of protection around my ankles? So I typically like something that's just a little bit higher than my ankle. So the ankles are protected, it's got good drainage, and it's something that I can wear in multiple terrains for hours and hours and hours without having to take my boots off because my toes are cramped, or, my feet are so swollen or sore that it's very difficult to move.
When you were at the unit, did you get to train on your own time?
Yes. Training on our own time, it was there. Like, we had access to everything you can imagine. So if, for an example, you want to polish up a skill on the range, you could literally sign your guns out, sign some ammo out, go to the range and polish that skill. You had access to that 24/7, and it's all controlled. So, guns go in and out of a vault with a key code. So that's controlled. Ammunition's the same. Access to the range is the same, but it was available and it was encouraged. Same with indoor CQB. If you had a group of guys that you want to stick around after, normal training hours were finished for the day and want to polish something up for an hour or two, you had access to that. We had access to a full gym complement. So, for anyone to fall out of shape, working at an organization, shame on you. There's no excuse for it, and there's no reason not to stay in shape. So yes, to answer your question, anything you can imagine at that organization was readily accessible, and the onus was on the individual to maintain that high level of readiness, that high level of professionalism, to polish any areas that maybe needed a little bit of polish.
Do you have any experiences jumping with a bundle?
I have not jumped with a bundle. I'm not tandem qualified, so I never had a human strapped to me, nor have I jumped out of an airplane with anything other than my rucksack and rifle. So no, I don't have that experience. Speaking to guys that have that experience, that is a animal on its own, and my hat is off to anybody that jumps with a bundle, jumps with a dog, or jumps with another human connected to them. My hat's off to you. That is not an easy task or element of skill that is easily attained. So hats off to those folks that can do that.
Can you speak to the importance of breathing when you are on an operation?
Absolutely. Breathing is probably an area that does get a little bit of attention, but maybe doesn't get the full respect that I believe it deserves. Oftentimes people that have trained with me or have heard me speak about breathing, I use an analogy of taking a breath of courage before entering a room, for example, and I'm as serious as a heart attack when I say that. Taking that big, deep belly diaphragmatic breath before kicking a door and not knowing what's on the inside, knowing that once the door is open, we're on reactive mode. That big, deep breath enables our, the prefrontal cortex of our brain to open up and actually assess and process information so we can make wise decisions. Over the years, I would say I became a little bit more sensitive to the importance of breath and breathing, whether to ramp ourselves up a little bit if we're maybe a little bit flat or becoming complacent, or the opposite, using breathing to calm down and really open up our vision and our acuity to situational awareness. I think breath is a tool that is underutilized, but once mastered can be the difference between making wise decisions or not.
Hopping over to our questions from YouTube, what is one small habit or detail you have recognized that separates a good operator from a great operator? That's an awesome question.
One small detail that separates a good operator from a excellent, high achieving, or optimal performing operator, I think, is attention to detail. I think there are some guys that are just so good. They're just good at everything they do. They're, maybe gifted is the right word. Every skill, they're just good at it. They work hard, they put in the effort, and they're just good at all those skills across the board. And then there's a few guys that are really, really good at some areas of skill attribution that needs to be acquired. And I think the difference that separates those two, the ones that are really good across the board, they're like a utility blade. You know, they're good at all things. They're dependable. They're reliable. And then there's the anomaly every now and again that stands out. So those outliers, I think the difference is they hone in or are dialed in a little bit more to the smaller details that are the difference between pretty good and really good.
Have you ever gotten sick on an operation?
I've gotten sick on an operation one time. Luckily, it didn't take me out of the game for too long. I was I'll caveat this story. I traveled to over 50 countries in the world, some on my personal time, some with work related tasks, and I drank the water from the tap every country I was into. I just turned the tap on, let it run for 10 or 15 seconds, and I would drink the water. And I kind of looked at it like, well, whatever might be in there is maybe going to help me and maybe build some resiliency towards, it's just overall gut health. So I was trying to like bulletproof my guts. So I thought the only way I'm going to do that is exposing it to the nastiness that might be in all these different countries. Well, that bit me in the ass, no pun intended, twice. Once I was in Thailand and I was really sick, like out of commission for almost a full day. So it ruined a whole day. I was there for vacation purposes. And it ruined almost a whole day where things were coming out of my body from every orifice and hole for almost a day. It was nasty. And I believe it was from bad water, not food. And then one time operationally, I got sick a little bit under the weather. Luckily, it only lasted a few hours or so. But I remember getting really sick and profusely sweating and shaking and freezing and then sweating. That lasted for about 4 to 6 hours, and then it passed. Whether that was the water or maybe something that I ate from a food contaminant, I'm not sure. I'm willing to believe it's probably the water. But that being said, only one time operationally, thank goodness, and it didn't leave me out of the fight too long, but I was pretty badly sick for a good 4 to 6 hours.
So when you were at the unit, did you have different bags or different setups for different types of operations ready, like at all times?
Yes. So when I was at the unit, I was very meticulous with kit layout and loadouts. So I'd have a bag, for example, that was geared towards anything bushcraft. So any green related, maybe long range patrolling stuff, I'd have a bag that was set up for that stuff. Something that I could carry a rucksack, something that I could still throw plates on if we needed to do a direct action mission. But generally that bag was set up specifically for anything bushcraft. And then I have another bag that was set up for anything maritime special operations. So anything that I'd have to do with subsurface or on the surface that was related to water specific stuff. I had a bag specifically for that. And then I would have other bags that would have other things that were specific to the task, maybe insert extract, so ropes, gloves that were specific to anything to get us into the job or off of the X at the end of a job. I'd have bags specific for that. And then generally it would have my kind of go-to bag, so sometimes referred to as a bag number one or a beast bag. So that would be the main bag that I would use, and that would have carrier setup, soft body armor setup, NVGs, helmet, everything that would be directly connected to a direct action operation. That was my primary bag. So in there would be normal stuff. So gloves, batteries, any extra pieces, parts, and components to the firearm that would maybe have a higher chance of breaking. So maybe an extra firing pin, maybe an extra extractor for my pistol or for the long gun. Anything that could potentially get busted, but I was able to fix and rectify on my own, I would have all of that stuff in that bag. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of kit and equipment to manage. There's a lot of things that are cross-pollinated between each task and job. So some of those things, I'd have replicas, or not replicas, I'd have duplicates of certain pieces. So being able to sign out for whatever, sign for 3 flashlights, for example. Well, I would have one in each bag rather than, getting to a job or an objective and realizing, well, that piece of equipment is in one of my other bags. So hopefully that answers your question. But yeah, it was very organized, it was very strategic, and it was very task specific.
Did you ever use those cool throat mics that we see in all the great movies from the 90s that all the SWAT guys and Navy SEALs were using?
Yeah, believe it or not, when I was on the assaulter course in 2004, our primary long gun was an MP5, and it was only after we graduated then we switched to the carbine rifle, but it was an MP5 as our primary, and we used to use those throat mics as a means of communication, and there was more wires and more entanglements with that piece of junk than you can imagine. Although I will say if I remember correctly, comms were pretty clear. So they did come across pretty clear. They were not bad, like in terms of reliability, but just very cumbersome and awkward and uncomfortable. But yeah, luckily that phased out pretty quick too after I became a graduated assaulter.
This one's actually popped up a couple times in the past. Were you paid well as a JTF2 assaulter?
Yes, we were paid well. The year that I got there was in 2004. There was no large pay incentive. There was an assaulter pay that was an incentive, I guess, but it wasn't huge. And what happened in 2004, 2005 era, Afghanistan was in full throttle. Iraq was very much a strong possibility that we were in lieu of preparing for. So motivation-wise was not the money for most guys. It was the operational purpose and the operational context that was driving a lot of guys. And it was 2006, I believe, 2007, where CANSOFCOM, as it's known now, it used to be called CJ SOTF. And at that time, it was ran and organized at the government level a little bit differently than it is now. At that time, there were a lot of changes where I believe it was Afghanistan was in full swing. Iraq was a strong potential. So at that time, we were pretty close to having 2 full lines of operation, fully operational, which would have been great. That being said, Iraq fell off the radar. Canada chose not to commit, and we stuck with Afghanistan. But in those changes between 2004, 2006, I believe, is when not a lot of guys, there were a few guys that were choosing to leave the unit, do some private contracting work because they were getting paid extremely well. What had happened and what transpired, I think, because of that, is the focus was now more on Afghanistan. We as an organization, the unit didn't want to lose these quality guys, so the pay bump really took effect around 2006, 2007, if I'm not mistaken. And then, around that time too was the infancy of CSOR. So there were a lot of changes between 2006 and 2009 for the betterment of the organization, and pay was one of them. So now the guys are, they're paid well. The allowances are pensionable, which is a huge change. In fact, the year that I retired, so September 2019, I think it was December 2019 is when those allowances became pensionable. So, I missed that part of the financial monetary, I would say, benefit. However, there were some guys that chose to get back into the unit and bump their pay a little bit, bump their pensionable allowances, which makes total sense. But at that time, when I got in 2004, I can only speak for myself. The pay was not a motivating factor. That was a real nice benefit and a real nice bonus when it did come into effect. But I can only speak for myself. Everyone has their motivations, and they're entitled to their wants, needs, and desires. But yeah, to answer your question, we got paid well. The guys do get paid well. Should they get paid more? In my opinion, yes. But yeah, they make good money. They do well. If the money conversation is to be had in any domain, I would say, invest in dedicated airlift, and invest in, rotary wing that's dedicated to the unit, fixed wing that's dedicated to the unit. Right now, that's still an Air Force domain, where I think the Air Force and JTF2 could really amalgamate and benefit from those financial investments that would give dedicated airlift. I think would be a huge benefit.
Should CAF scoop a couple Blackhawks as they get phased out from the U.S.?
Yeah, the fact that the Black Hawk helicopter is, being phased out and it's going to be replaced with something else, I'm sure it's going to be as good, if not better. But that is a very reliable airframe. It's built with purpose. It's proven. It's been battle tested. It's a great platform. Sure. I mean, technology, equipment, everything evolves. Everything gets a little bit better, a little bit more streamlined, more efficient, and that's a good thing. If Canada had the ability to, purchase a few more Black Hawk helicopters, I think it would only be a good thing. It wouldn't necessarily have any negative effect. I mean, we do have Chinooks in the regime right now, which is, it's a great platform. Like I said earlier, like having that dedicated airlift to specific organizations that would utilize it so they can do their job, domestically or abroad, is where really the juice is worth the squeeze.
Last question, not on any sheet. Have you finished watching Warfare yet?
Yes. Recently watched the movie Warfare, which a very, very good movie. What I liked about it was there's a lot of realism in terms of, some bad decisions made, some poor planning made, some really good stuff too. Just the way that those actors were kind of navigated and directed to move through the street. Some of that was very, very accurate and bang on. What I really liked about it was there wasn't a lot of cinematic, like Hollywood typical, like music and explosions and, people flying over sofas and stuff. It was quiet. It was very visual. And it kind of, I won't say triggered anything on the inside, but I was definitely watching it with a couple of times, like kind of goosebumps or like an uneasy feeling with the way that it was unfolding. And not to ruin it for folks that haven't seen it, but there's a medical scenario that unfolds for quite some time during the movie, and just the amount of time it took to properly apply a tourniquet under the stress and under the chaos. And to me, like it definitely connected with me. It was a very, very well done movie, in my opinion. For a lot of good takeaways, both good and bad. But yeah, I finished it, I watched it, and I would say very good movie. If you haven't seen it, it's worth a watch.
Actual last question for you is, okay. We get a lot of questions talking about what should their PT routine for selection prep look like? What kind of exercises should they be doing? Should they be rucking? Should they be sprinting? Just basically trying to figure out what they should be doing for selection prep or TAC prep or anything like that. Like, what is there a general answer you can give to everyone who's asking for all of these different programming advices and everything for selection? Okay.
I would say, depending on the organization that you're trying out for, try to get a little bit of information on what's required, and then also know what the minimum standards are to even get your application a set of eyes to be looked at. So why the minimum standard is what I often have conversations with young men and women who are interested is they get really hung up about what the entry level standard PT test is. I look at that as that should be a warm up. That should be something that you do first thing in the morning, empty stomach. You can do it again right after lunch, after you had a big meal. You can do it again. You're not worried about it. And then you do it again for the third time before you go to bed. And it's literally a warm up before your actual segment of training. The minimums are exactly that. They're a minimum as a liability. What the organizations are saying, we're going to take you in, we're going to have a look at you. We got to make sure that you're fit enough that, this system or this process is not going to kill you. So for people to get hung up on the minimum, optimally, you want to be able to crush those, and minimums are just like a very, almost like a formality. So where I would add on to that is, in preparation, know what it is as best as you can to what you're trying out for. So for an example, let's use CJRU. There's components of strength, there's components of anaerobic threshold development, and there's components of aerobic. So be able to, and it's not a cakewalk for folks that might think, it's a cakewalk. It's not. It's challenging, but it's different. The selection process is shorter than that of CSOR. So CSOR, very much aerobic. So longer durations, longer ranges while under load. So either carrying heavy stuff or you got heavy stuff on your back for longer durations. So more anaerobic. So being able to prepare yourself to carry a rucksack and carry heavy weight for a duration of time is, again, different from JTF2 selection, which is more anaerobic based. So all of these organizations and the selection process differ over time. They change from year to year. There's certain demands that will, require different outputs and different performance standards. So how do we generalize? I would say be able to move your body well. So be able to run well, be able to carry a rucksack for, a decent amount of distance with a decent amount of weight. And what does that look like? For me, a decent distance would be, 10 to 15 kilometers carrying a rucksack of 55 to 65 pounds. That's a decent number to aspire to get to and build up to in a progressive manner in preparation. I don't see any benefit to running marathons every week. I don't see any benefit to rucksacking, 30 or 50 kilometers every week. All that's really going to do is beat the snot out of your body. It's going to break your body down. It's going to cause overuse injuries. I don't see a benefit to it. But being able to carry a rucksack and being able to run your body. Oftentimes I get questions on what does the programming look like? Should I run 3 kilometers on Monday, lift weights on Tuesday, carry a rucksack on Wednesday, do something in the pool on Thursday, and then rinse and repeat on Friday? I would say if you're honest with where you assess your strengths and limitations, where they are, if you're honest with that, and we know that maybe we're not a good runner yet, but we can, lift a truck. Well, what we do know from that is you're strong. So I wouldn't spend a whole lot of time in the gym doing resistance training when we know that the limiting factor is our ability to run, being able to run and recover, be able to, execute a level of flexibility or a range of motion in the shoulders and the hips. Identifying those limitations and weaknesses and addressing those while in preparation is more important than getting a 1 PR improvement on your overhead squat, for an example. So I would say when we do an assessment to see where our baseline levels are, whatever that baseline level you use as a measurement of marker, as a metrics, revisit that every 6 to 8 weeks and then see where your improvements are being made, but also if it identifies any contributing limiting factors. So overall, if you're interested in CSOR, CJRU, JTF2, the demands on the body for each of those selections are going to be very different. So as we prepare for them, it's wise that we understand what it is that we're getting into. All 3 of those organizations, which I can speak with confidence, you're going to be required to run. You're going to be required to do push-ups. You're going to be required to do sit-ups and pull-ups and carry a rucksack or some sort of weight load variant in some capacity or another. So as you're doing these things, remember, optimally, we want to train and prepare in a progressive manner so the body can adapt. Ligaments can grow and strengthen with our muscles. And we also know that our muscles will develop and grow quicker than our ligaments. So if the muscles are large and dense and stiff and tight, without giving the adequate amount of time for our ligaments to catch up and be able to sustain that added weight, for an example, we are a ticking time bomb and a disaster waiting to happen. So everything needs to be done in a progressive manner, but also respect that all of us have different strengths and limitations. If we spend a little bit more time developing our limitations and a little less time, but still reinforcing our strengths, I think you're on the right track. At the end of the day, from a physical perspective, the more physically fit we are and leading into whatever selection you choose to endeavor, the physical piece is important, and the more physically prepared you are, the more cognitively sharp you're going to be to make wise decisions so you can perform most optimally. So without the physical piece, there's going to be a reduction in your mental capability and your cognitive load. Vice versa, if we put too much emphasis on, being mentally strong and mentally capable without the battle chassis being in a condition manner to sustain what it's going to undertake, then again, I think it's a ticking time bomb where disaster will incur. So equal part strength and conditioning, equal part mental resiliency. You smash those two together, you mix it up, and you got yourself what I believe to be a very good foundation leading into selection. So whether it's anaerobic based, aerobic based, or a combination of strength, aerobic, and aerobic, I think you're on the right track. So build up your limitations and your weaknesses and reinforce your strengths.